Hi everyone, I'm Hannah from the Eldersburg Library, and I'm here today to do a YA book talk. I'm going to suggest some great young adult titles for you guys. And I've done a few of these in the past. I think the last one I did was in the winter time, maybe? I can't remember. But just going to casually tell you what a few books are about. These are all things I highly recommend. I think the bulk of them are probably going to be fantasy, because that's what I read the most of. And excuse my chair pile. And hopefully this will be gone soon, but this is where they're storing the furniture because there's a pandemic. But just please pretend that my background is less messy. But we're going to talk about some really great books, and let's just get started. And also, because it's going to be June when this comes out, and it is Pride Month, I'm going to talk about a few titles that have some really good LGBT rep. It's always great to find those. And I'll just suggest some titles that I think you'll enjoy. So the first book I have to recommend to you today is a fantasy novel that I literally just read that was super good, and that is The Dark Tide by Elisa Jasinska. I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. This is what it looks like. This is a standalone young adult novel, fantasy, and it takes place in a fantasy world in a island city that's constantly threatened by floods, where the ruling class is made up of witches who can do magic, whereas everyone else in the city is just a regular human. And every year, to prevent the city from flooding, the Witch Queen, the queen of the city, chooses a teenage boy from the village to sacrifice in a ceremony where the sacrifice drowns in the tide, and the city is safe from flooding for another year. The story follows a girl named Lena who lives in the village and has feelings for a boy named Thomas, who is the only person to ever survive being chosen as the sacrifice, as the queen that year sacrificed herself instead. And when Thomas is chosen again to be the sacrifice by Eva, the current queen, Lena offers herself in his place and ends up traveling to the palace with the queen until it is the time for the full moon when the sacrifice occurs. Meanwhile, Eva, the queen, has just taken the throne as her sister sacrificed herself to the tide the previous year. And she believes that the sacrifice is the only way to save the city, even though all the other witches in her court are beginning these rumors that her magic is not strong enough. Since her sister's death, she has become very closed off and emotionally numb and almost nearly becomes a villain. But when Lena offers to take Thomas's place as the sacrifice and begins living in the palace, they begin to converse with each other and begin developing this relationship and eventually develop feelings for one another. And now they must contend with the fact that despite these feelings they're developing, Lena is going to be sacrificed to the tide by the full moon, and they have to find a way to avert the sacrifice while still saving the city. And I feel like I explained that really poorly. I had to do it in like 3 takes because it's a kind of complicated book. But this has a really well-developed relationship. I am very, very particular about my enemies to lovers romance. Like, if it's done bad, I just can't do it. And I really love this one. It gives both of the characters enough time to develop, and it's just super good. The setting is really cool. It's one of those cool fantasy worlds. It's kind of like 1910s, 1920s inspired instead of just like medieval and Victorian, like everything. And it's just a really, almost a little gothic-y, really neat setting for a fantasy novel. And it's a standalone, so you don't have to commit to like 3 books top plus. And I just highly recommend this. If you're looking for something that's kind of dark but has really fantastic character writing, The Dark Tide is a fantastic book. The next title I have to suggest is a young adult contemporary, mostly a romance, that I do not actually have in person, but here's what the cover looks like. You cannot see that. But the book is called The Love Curse of Melody McIntyre by Robin Talley. Here's what it looks like. And this is a fairly new release. It's a young adult realistic. The story follows a girl named Melody who is very dedicated in her role as the stage manager for her high school's theater department. And every year the school puts on a big musical, and this year they're doing Les Mis, which is her favorite show. And during almost every show, Melody ends up in a relationship with someone from the production. And for every show, the cast develops a superstition, something where everyone has to touch a painting in the hallway before the show, or there's a certain word that no one's allowed to say, or else things will start going wrong. And it is decided the crew of the show decides that year the superstition will be that Melody is not allowed to fall in love with anyone during the production because they think that whenever she does, something ends up going wrong. So she's on board with this, but then a girl named Odile comes back to the school, and she was involved in the theater department, but went off a few years to pursue her acting career. She's actually been in some TV shows, but had a very successful acting career. And she ends up coming back to the high school and gets the role of Fantine in the play. And during the course of the production, Odile and Melody start spending more time together, and they start developing feelings for each other. But Melody feels like she has to keep this secret so that no one will think that she's violating the superstition. And I won't spoil much else from there, but this is a super cute book. I'm a little biased because I'm a big musical theater fan myself, and I actually did Les Mis as a teenager. In a community production in Eldersburg, I played the role of Poor. That is how I was credited, which is a different way of saying ensemble. So it's a bit close to my heart, but I love this book. It is really, the romance is really, really cute. It gets the theater kids of high school right in several ways. It's just pretty much like a big love letter to high school theater and a really, really sweet romance. Fun character writing. If you're looking for something that's just good friendships as well. If you're looking for something that's just like a real fluffy, light book, something that's just fun to read, highly recommend The Love Curse of Melody McIntyre by Robin Talley. And during almost every show, Melody ends up in a relationship with someone from the production. And for every show, the cast develops a superstition, something where everyone has to touch a painting in the hallway before the show, or there's a certain word that no one's allowed to say, or else things will start going wrong. And it is decided, the crew of the show decides that year the superstition will be that Melody is not allowed to fall in love with anyone during the production because they think that whenever she does, something ends up going wrong. So she's on board with this, but then a girl named Odile comes back to the school, and she was involved in the theater department, but went off a few years to pursue her acting career. She's actually been in some TV shows, but had a very successful acting career. And she ends up coming back to the high school and gets the role of Fantine in the play. And during the course of the production, Odile and Melody start spending more time together, and they start developing feelings for each other. But Melody feels like she has to keep this secret so that no one will think that she's violating the superstition. And I won't spoil much else from there, but this is a super cute book. I'm a little biased because I'm a big musical theater fan myself, and I actually did Les Mis as a teenager. In a community production in Eldersburg, I played the role of Poor. That is how I was credited, which is a different way of saying ensemble. So it's a bit close to my heart, but I love this book. It is really, the romance is really, really cute. It gets the theater kids of high school right in several ways. It's just pretty much like a big love letter to high school theater and a really, really sweet romance. Fun character writing. If you're looking for something that's just good friendships as well. If you're looking for something that's just like a real fluffy, light book, something that's just fun to read, highly recommend The Love Curse of Melody McIntyre by Robin Talley. Okay, it is the next day, and I am in a different outfit, but we are still talking about books, and the next thing I have to recommend to you is another fantasy book, and it is Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. It looks like this. This is another standalone fantasy novel. I'm so glad there's more of those lately. And this is just, if you're looking for like kind of a classic fantasy, but not like super cliche, this is a great one. It gave me a lot of the same energy as like the Infernal Devices series by Cassandra Clare, which is my favorite of her series. It's Sorcery of Thorns is set in a kind of Victorian fantasy world where there are regular humans and sorcerers who can do magic. And sorcerers are generally, they keep within their own community. A lot of people just kind of think they're evil. But their magic comes from these living sentient books, these spell books that, if unattended or corrupted by magic, will turn into monsters that have to be defeated. And these spell books are kept in these magical libraries. There's a few of these highly guarded libraries throughout this world. And the main character, Elizabeth, is an orphan who was raised in one of these libraries, who is trained to become a librarian. And learning how to defeat these monsters and maintain these living books of spells. And when the library is attacked and one of these monsters is created, she ends up defeating it single-handedly, but is blamed for corrupting it in the first place. And because she is accused of the sabotage, she is dismissed from the library and sent to live with a sorcerer named Nathaniel and his demon servant. And they end up discovering a conspiracy involving all these libraries and the sorcerers community and their government. And to go much more would be a spoiler, but you have these three really great characters who end up uncovering this huge conspiracy involving magical libraries, and it is such a fun time. You have kind of all these like classic fantasy elements. You've got like sorcerers who can do magic, and a character who's an outsider to this world coming into it. But it's also one of those cool fantasy books that it's not very cliche, because it doesn't spend a huge amount of time in exposition. It just kind of throws you in the fantasy world and you figure it out as you go along, and it's really easy to pick up. And it's also one of those great ones that it's not a book about like saving the world or magic quest to get the thing. It's just a cool book in a cool setting. Again, I'm like biased because I'm a librarian, so I heard Magic Library and I'm just like, yay! But if you're looking for something that has big classic fantasy vibes, really great writing between the main three characters, good relationship dynamics, really fantastic main character. You've got like a very well-developed, well-written protagonist, and just a really fun time. I highly recommend Sorcery of Thorns. Right, the next book I have to share is actually a short story collection. It's A Universe of Wishes, and this is a We Need Diverse Books anthology. This is what it looks like. And We Need Diverse Books is this really great organization made up mostly of young adult authors that's designed to promote diversity in YA. So I think that's really cool. And every so often they come out with a short story collection. This is the latest one. And this one is my favorite so far. It's all fantasy and sci-fi short stories. And it's kind of hard to describe, because each story is essentially its own, set in its own fantasy or science fiction setting. And so you get a spectrum of stuff. You get everything from fantasy world set in like historical time periods to space-based sci-fi, even some contemporary fantasy. But you've got all sorts of stories. You've got stories. There's one about two women who are in a competition to marry the royalty of their kingdom, but end up falling in love with each other. There's one about transporting plants to a new planet as the Earth is declining. That's really good. There's a sort of Cinderella retelling where the main character is actually trying to infiltrate the ball in order to seek asylum for her people from the kingdom. There's just all these really unique stories. And if you're a fan of really popular young adult authors, there's some Liva Bray, Zoraida Cordova, who I love her stuff. Anna Marie McLemore has a story in this, and she writes really fantastic fantasy. And if you're a fan of the Gemma Doyle trilogy by Liva Bray or A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab, both of those have short stories in here with the characters. And the Liva Bray one especially made me really excited. It seems like it might be like a sequel hook. I don't know if anyone's read that series here who I'm talking to. It's from when I was in middle school, but I loved it back then. I still do. But if you're looking for like kind of a variety of stuff, and like some very unique stories, all really well written, highly recommend A Universe of Wishes. Alright, the next book I have to recommend to you is a contemporary fantasy, and I don't have it with me, so I'm going to show you the cover on my phone. It's Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. This is what it looks like, and this is one of my favorite books I've read this year. The story follows a young man named Yatel, who lives in a family of Brujas and Brujas who are able to communicate with ghosts and maintain a cemetery since they're able to speak with all of the ghosts living there. And when someone in this family turns 16, they go through a ritual to unlock their abilities, but Yatel's family has not allowed him to perform this ritual because they are having issues accepting his identity as trans. And so he and his cousin decide to perform the ritual themselves, and then seek out the ghost of one of their cousins who was recently murdered. But instead, they find the ghost of a classmate who was also recently murdered. And he is determined to find out what happened to him before he passes on and to make sure that his friends are all right. And so Yatail agrees to help this ghost in order to get the closure he needs to pass on and to prove himself as a bro to his family. But they end up developing a relationship and becoming really close with each other. And it becomes more and more difficult to want him to pass on because they're starting to develop romantic feelings. And again, I feel like I'm describing this so badly, but I love this book so much. The dynamic between the main two characters is fantastic. It's one of the best romances I've read in a very long time, and the fantasy elements of the story are great as well. It's a supernatural story, but it's not actually that scary. So if you're like me and you don't do horror, you'll be good to go. It's a ghost book that's not actually too scary. But if you're looking for a really solid romance with really solid fantasy elements, I highly recommend Cemetery Boys. And finally, the last book I have to show you is, again, I just have to say out a picture of, and it is a graphic novel. It's technically middle grade, but I loved it. YA readers will love it. It's Beetle and the Hollow Bones by Eliza Lane. It looks like this. There you go, now you can see it. This is a really, really fun graphic novel. It's very colorful. And Beetle and the Hollow Bones takes place in a world that's similar to ours, but everyone is like a magical creature, like goblins and skeletons and ghosts. And the main character is a goblin named Beetle, and she's learning to be a witch from her grandmother, but she spends a lot of time at the local mall with her best friend, who is a ghost just named Blob Ghost, who looks like this, who is trapped in this mall. And Beetle has become best friends with this ghost and spends a lot of time at the mall to hang out with them. But then her best friend who moved away, Kat, comes back into town to be mentored by, I believe, her grandmother. I'm not sure, an aunt, I think. But she returns to town, and she is very advanced in learning to be a witch. But she and Beetle start talking again, and they soon learn that the aunt has a scheme to tear down the old mall. And since the Blob Ghost is trapped there, they need to find a way to avoid this from happening and figure out why exactly the aunt wants to destroy the mall. And I don't want to spoil much else from there, but this is such a fun book. Again, really great character writing. And a fun fact, if you live in Carroll County, the author is a local author, and the mall in this graphic novel is actually inspired by the mall in Westminster. And yeah, and I would believe that the mall in Westminster is deeply haunted. So it goes well with this book. The art style is really fun, and so is the world. If you like the cartoon Owl House, it gave me some of the same energies as that. We've got LGBT representation, and just a really great friendship story, a little bit of romance. If you're looking for a graphic novel, this is a really great time. I highly recommend Beetle and the Hollow Bones. And with that, that's going to be the end of this book talk. I feel like it's getting kind of long. All of these books are either available at Carroll County Public Library or on Hoopla, which is a app that's available through the library. You download it. It looks like, I'm trying to bring it up. But you get $12 a month. You just sign in with your library card. It's all free, and you can stream audiobooks, ebooks. They have a little bit of TV and movies, not a huge amount. It looks like this. And you get comic books, graphic novels, ebooks. It's where I get all my audiobooks. And once you check something out, you can just keep it until you're done with it, and you're able to renew it. You don't have to return it for the next person in line. It's a really great app. Highly recommend. So all the books are either available on Hoopla or in physical copies here at the library. And I hope you all enjoyed this book talk. Please email me if you have any questions about the titles at ajohns@carr.org, and have a great day. Bye!